So, welcome everybody to another Startup Centre Victoria meetup. Now, we have to fess up first off that this presentation with our special guest, Jacob Kiel, was given last week in Maryborough, but he's very kindly come back to record this presentation so everyone can benefit from it. It is such an important and timely topic. Cybersecurity. It doesn't matter whether you're a little business or a big business, we're all vulnerable and it's all good information. So, Jacob Kiel is a consulting partner for digital resilience and he's part of the Bendigo office, but they do have clients all over the world: Asia, North America, Europe, and Australia. And the business has offices in Adelaide, Melbourne, and Bendigo, where Jacob is based. Prior to this firm, Jacob, you might recall, was part of Bendigo Adelaide Bank, which is very familiar to us all in the region. He was the former manager for information security. So he is living this stuff, and I'm very pleased that he's agreed to share his knowledge with us. So thank you, Jacob. We're going to go through some slides, and there will be some questions that we received at the end. So I'll hand over to you now.
All right, thanks, Kerry, and thanks for the invite. So, as everyone's aware, and you turn on the TV or open the paper these days, cybersecurity is in the media, typically not for the so good. But so today I want to kind of cover a number of different things around cybersecurity and how you can go about protecting your business. So what I want to cover today is firstly what cybersecurity is about. There's a lot of misconceptions around that. We'll then lead into what are the common threats facing businesses today, and then finally some controls, or what we call safeguards, around how you can protect your business. Now, I thought I'd first start off with this slide before getting into the presentation. I do like this slide. So there's two types of businesses: those who have been hacked and those who don't yet know they have been. So when we talk about security breaches or compromises, I think pretty much around 94% of data breaches occur in less than 1 minute. And about 80% of those breaches could have been defeated by putting just some basic security controls in, which we're going to cover later in the presentation. So firstly, what is cybersecurity? So when we look at cybersecurity, the old thinking is around putting kind of technology and firewalls in place to somewhat protect your business. It's actually a lot more than that. When we look at cybersecurity, we talk about people, process, and technology. And it's all around the processes and methodologies designed to essentially protect physical and electronic data. And when we look at cybersecurity, we kind of break it down into three pillars: so confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So when we look at confidentiality, we're looking at how we actually protect the information and for only those that should have access to it. From an integrity perspective, we're looking at the authenticity of the information, so it is accurate. And then finally, the last pillar is availability, so we can actually access the data when and as needed. And the end goal of this is to build a resilient business. So in the event an incident does happen, we can continue to run and operate our business successfully. Now we'll start getting into, I suppose, the common threats facing businesses today. Now, look, it doesn't matter if you're a small business, medium business, large, international. The types of threats that businesses face are all the same. It just depends on the degree and severity of them. But at the end of the day, what are cyber criminals after? They're after pretty much what we call passwords or credentials, so username and password, so they can then access into your different systems environments. They're after intellectual property, so which we can classify as business information. They're after financial information, next your identity, and then money. So all this usually comes back to they want to monetize this at the end of the day. All right, we'll get into the first threat. So I've got 5 threats here. The first one is phishing. So hopefully everyone's heard about this. Is the most common type of threat or online scam today, and it pretty much involves a fraudulent attempt to obtain some form of sensitive information, whether that be username, passwords, credit card information, personal information. And it's usually the channel it's used is posing to be from a trustworthy entity. So then they can to misinform you and make you provide those details. As I touched on previously, or it's there on the slide, so phishing can occur through multiple channels, whether it be email, those text messages you receive usually when you're having tea, social media, things like that. And that's pretty much it about phishing. So phishing is a form of social engineering. That's probably the other point worth making. All right, the next threat we've got here is malware and ransomware. So I've kind of separated them out. So the first one is malware. So years ago, it's typically known as a virus, is what it was called, but now it's malware, which stands for malicious software. And the goal of that is to pretty much damage, disable, or steal information from your computer system. And a form of that is ransomware, which again, if you turn on the news, you've probably heard it multiple times, or pick up the paper, heard about it. So this is a type of malware that pretty much encrypts your computer system so you're unable to read or retrieve your files. And then the cybercriminal demands some kind of payment to allow you to decrypt your files. Now, these days they go one step further. They typically will exfiltrate or take your data off your systems or make a copy of it, then run the encryption, demand the ransom. If you don't pay the ransom, they then try to make a different ransom to say we'll then expose your information or files on the dark web. Now, malware, how can it infect your computer system? So the common ways are typically through some kind of email attachment or attachment on an email that you'll open and then executes onto your device. You download software from an untrustworthy site. You go to an infected website. Social engineering, so as part of the previous attack mentioned before, and then physical devices, so such as a USB. So don't plug in a USB if you find it on the street. All right, the next type of threat, data compromise or data leakage. So cyber criminals use kind of, I suppose, all kinds of different approaches to steal sensitive business information, including your personal information. Now, this is both from a personal but also business level as well. Where the cyber criminals are really just trying to steal your information or sensitive and confidential information. Now, data compromise or data leakage can happen both intentionally or unintentionally. So unintentionally could be just a matter of you've attached some kind of sensitive document and emailed it to the wrong person. So that's what we'd call unintentional data leakage. So that's the third most common type of threat facing businesses today. Now, the fourth one, business email compromise. Now, this is very common and we're seeing it quite a lot, especially in these smaller businesses these days, but it involves kind of compromising a legitimate business's email account to then conduct fraudulent activity. Now, that fraudulent activity could be things like sending fake invoices to your existing clients or customers or providers that you use to get them to pay an invoice into a fraudulent bank account. Now, you're probably asking why or how does the cybercriminal typically compromise your email account? So again, this comes back to either something like a password guessing attack, again, using social engineering to capture and compromise your username and password, or even just looking at a vulnerability in your email system so they can compromise it. And then lastly, the third type of threat that businesses face today is third-party compromise. I've tacked on insider threat, so to try to make this more about the people we trust within our business. Now, most businesses, or pretty much all businesses these today, use some kind of third party or supplier. These days, it is very common, or the cyber criminals will compromise a third party to gain access into your environment. So even though you may have all these security controls in place, it is just as easy to compromise a third party that either has access to your systems or you're sending data to them. So it's kind of really seen as an extension of your business in some regards. And then tacked onto that is the whole people we trust within our business. I've got insider threats. So this is the people that are working within our business. And again, it can lead to, or can be both intentional or unintentional, or they can intentionally or unintentionally cause harm to your computer systems. Now we've covered off, I suppose, the common threats facing businesses today. What I want to lead into next is, I suppose, some common controls or safeguards or measures you can put in place and consider today to help safeguard your business. So firstly here we've got is all about education awareness, educating yourself and your staff around what are the threats and the scams facing everyone these days, and what they can do about them if they do receive a phishing email or other types of scams. So again, this is kind of your best bang for buck. As we say, knowledge is power here. So educate your staff and yourself around what's going on around in the security landscape these days. And also, as part of that, making sure that everyone's open and can communicate within your business, that if someone does see something suspicious, they're actually feel comfortable in raising it or sharing it with others, so everyone's got the same level of knowledge. Secondly, there somewhat falls under the banner of education awareness, but don't open attachments or clicking links in emails or any kind of communication channel that you believe or seems suspicious. Again, this is kind of one of the most common starts of any kind of business compromise. Third point there, we've got around be wary around downloading free software or installing free software. This typically comes with malware or malicious programs. The fourth point there is more knowing or reconciling your bank accounts and knowing what's going in and out, reconciling them with even invoices and things like that. This is more of a detection mechanism around if something has happened. And then lastly on this page is around looking at your user access controls. So who's got access into your environment, into your systems, whether it's Xero, your social media accounts. You need to manage who's got access to that. Even on a frequent basis, you probably want to look at reviewing that access. So when you've got time on a frequent basis, open up your social media or Xero, look at who those users are and just verify that those users are actually still working with your business and they still require the level of access they do. Now moving on to a few more things to consider. So enable multi-factor. So see this as kind of a must-have these days. So anywhere that there's some form of login or username and password, enable multi-factor authentication. And alongside that, look at passphrases rather than passwords, and never share any of those details. Second point there, make sure you've got antivirus software or malware software installed, malware protection software installed on your machines, and make sure they are always up to date with their signatures to make sure they can scan your devices. Third point there, turn on your device firewalls for that level of protection, and also alert you if anything suspicious is actually happening on your device. The fourth one there, which again, when we talk about must-have controls, is around making sure all your software and operating systems are kept up to date, patched all the time. Because again, this is how malware executes on your machine, is usually through a certain bug or vulnerability in certain software you've got on your device. And then lastly on this slide is making sure you actually back up your data. So again, as we mentioned at the start of the presentation, it's not a matter of if, but when something happens. So when actually does happen, and your data potentially has been encrypted through some kind of ransomware, you've got this backup to then restore from or access some data so you can continue to run your business.
Jack, can I just jump in here? Because I think I recall this question being asked at Maryborough. Can you explain what a passphrase is as opposed to a password?
Yeah, so when we look at passwords, that's when the system typically asks you to make sure it's X characters long, it's capitals and characters and that kind of thing. That's kind of a password. As a passphrase is looking at, I suppose, multiple words and stringing them together. Because when we look at things like password crackers, they know everyone's going to have a capital letter at the start. The second last is probably going to be a number, and then the last one's going to be a character.
Oh my goodness. Right. Thank you.
That's all right. So there's a few, I suppose, safeguards to consider and put in place. And to summarise that up, I thought it's worth just asking a few questions for you to consider about. So the first one there is, do you know what assets you have that others want? And when we talk about assets, they can be both electronic form or physical form. So if you're like a medical practice that was still printing out forms or faxing forms, classify that as some kind of informational asset. So do you know what others want within your business from a cybersecurity sense? Because that then helps you then work out what needs protecting and how to protect it. Second question there to ask yourself is, do you know how your actions could make these assets more vulnerable? So this comes back to some of those things around phishing and malware and clicking on links and opening up attachments. So if you kind of think about that and what that action can lead to, potentially that will help you stop and think and prevent some of this stuff actually happening up front. Next one there is, do you understand how these assets could be accessed or disrupted? So this is looking at, again, coming back to that first question, knowing what you've got. This is then taking the next step and looking at, well, who's got access? Do they need access? What happens if someone accesses that and they shouldn't? So that's all around that type of question or things to consider. The second last one there is, would you know if you were being attacked or if your assets had been compromised? So this is one area I suppose most small businesses don't consider or have a lot of consideration for. It's usually after the fact or after being compromised down the track, or days or weeks later realise, oh, something's a bit different. Maybe something's happened. But yeah, think about how would you actually know if someone was trying to steal or compromise those informational assets, and what you do about it. And then lastly, do you have a response plan that in the event something does happen, how would actually you continue to run your day-to-day business on one side of the fence, and on the other side, how would you actually recover if you are using technology and restore backups and things like that. So that's it. I know I've gone over it very quick. Um, Kerry, we had a couple of questions.
We did, and look, it's really, I think the whole exercise that came down in your talk was to get us all thinking about what we know we should do, but we think is too hard. And I certainly took away from your presentation the fact is we have to do this stuff and schedule it. So some of the questions that we had was what's best practice for a cloud-based environment, O365, Google Workspace, etc., for small business enterprise, and that endpoint user protection on backup solutions, both local and cloud-based.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned the other night that we typically don't recommend products, but look, your Googles or your Microsofts are the typical platform of choice these days. Things like Microsoft 365 does offer that kind of suite of products of some malware protection that you can install on your devices and things like that. There are a lot of configuration around data security that you can have a play around with. But yeah, the main, I suppose, thing around this is just do something rather than nothing, and continue to improve and uplift and mature what you've got.
Right. And I guess that the next question tied in with that too, do the simple programs like Norton work, or should we be doing more? How can we best protect ourselves against scams?
Yeah, so a lot of this, there is no kind of silver bullet that's going to stop everything and mitigate everything. So when we talk about cybersecurity, we look at having a layer of controls. So things like your AV that you mentioned there. Again, there's a lot of antivirus products. Something is better than nothing. It's more making sure that whatever you've got is kept up to date. And in the scenario, if you go back to thinking about what you need to protect, if it's that sensitive, there's a real high risk that something could happen. Potentially, go for more of an enterprise grade antivirus solution.
Right. And I asked this question, if you recall, should we pay the ransom?
Yes. So my response is no. So it is actually against laws and regulations in Australia to pay a ransom because it's seen as terrorist financing on most accounts.
Mm. And another common one, I remember you frightened me when you said particularly the construction industry is getting targeted at the moment. And we all know our tradies love their paperwork and that they just can't wait to sit in front of a computer and keep in touch with everything. So that how vulnerable they are, particularly if what should we do if a supplier changes their bank account? And this has happened to me where I've received an invoice and it was a substantial amount and it had, please note our new bank account details. Is that a flag we should take notice of
Yes,
or not?
yes, certainly. So that is your typical business email compromise, and as mentioned, the tradies is a common target at the moment, purely because they probably deal less with computers and systems these days, so are an easy target. But the typical invoice scam of they'll modify an invoice to an existing supplier or customer with fraudulent payment details. So if you ever do receive something like that, it is worth going back to one of the original invoices or do a search on Google or a search engine and actually contact them directly to say, hey, I've received this email. It's saying you've changed your payment details. Is that actually correct? So try to avoid just acting that straight away and try to avoid contacting the people or the contact numbers or details on that actual invoice in case it is you're contacting the fraudster.
Yes. Well, I'm glad that was good advice because that's exactly what I did. And when I rang the firm, they were quite surprised. But when they thought about it, they said, thank you. Yeah, so good advice. I guess for people that aren't familiar with technology, it is such a daunting prospect, the fact that we are, as you say, no one is removed from this threat. We're all to it. I guess the important thing that I took away is that we do something. We are paying attention. If something doesn't seem right, contact whatever IT specialists that we use and look into it straight away, as much as we don't want to think about it and hope that we're wrong. The important thing is to take action and be vigilant on this. So, thank you, Jake, for taking us through that and so succinctly. It's just a reminder. We already know a lot of this already. We just have to be reminded to do this. And we really thank you for your time and sharing your knowledge. So, thank you.
That's right. Thanks, Kerry.
And this is where